Okay, the purpose of this video is to help you understand what you need to know to successfully write your thesis papers for this class. So this video is going to touch upon 3 different handouts that are also available to you on Canvas. The first handout that we're going to go through is on the writing process, which I break down into 4 steps, and it includes some just general information about writing to help make the project of writing a paper more approachable for you. The next handout will be on thesis statements. So the assignment is to write a thesis paper, which is organized around a thesis statement. So it's important for you to understand what that means. What is a thesis statement? How do you develop a thesis statement? And how do you organize a thesis paper that's intended to be an argumentative paper? So we'll talk about that. And then the third and final handout that I'll go over in this video is some very basic information about citation. Before I dive into the first handout, I just want to explain a little bit my experience with writing. I have extensive experience with writing and have had to do it a ton throughout my academic career. Probably the most interesting thing that I wrote was a master's thesis on the reality TV show Here Comes Honey Boo Boo, which I'll speak a little bit about later. I also have experience teaching writing courses. Something that's kind of frustrating when you're learning how to write and you're a newer writer is that as you learn the process, you're going to learn from different instructors, or maybe you had an English teacher in high school, etc. And what's frustrating is you realize how a lot of writing is very subjective, and you have to kind of develop your own style. However, there are some basic constraints that are helpful to new writers to help them understand how to organize and communicate their ideas in a clear fashion. And I'll kind of speak more about that later in this video. But since writing is ultimately subjective and has to do with style, sometimes instructors often use rubrics to make students feel like when they're being assessed for their writing that it's more quantitative, like the way a math problem would be. And in my experience as both an instructor and student, I find that rubrics end up penalizing students more in a more strict way than perhaps if the instructor just sort of holistically grades the paper and just explains general reasons for why a student is getting the grade that they're getting. So I've been teaching almost 7 years at the time of that I'm recording this video, and I've never really used a rubric for writing, and I try to be a really generous grader, and that really hasn't been a problem not using a rubric. I will talk about this later, but in general, what I'm looking for when I'm grading a paper is clarity. How clearly communicated are the ideas? Do they make sense? Is the language that's being used to communicate them easy to understand? Organization, which I'll talk more about, which is really important, especially when you're writing an argumentative paper. Is the argument organized? Do you build up to proving your point? Sophistication of ideas, which would be like, for example, a thesis that expresses the opinion that Abraham Lincoln was a nice president is like a really general, very basic kind of idea. rather than a more nuanced claim or more sophisticated claim about like the of Abraham Lincoln's presidency, for example. And then in the case of these thesis papers that are supposed to be argumentative papers, I also look at the general persuasiveness. And with all of those aspects of what I'm looking for, I keep in mind that these papers are relatively short, and there's only so much you can do within the constraints of the page limit. Before continuing, the last thing into the document I have pulled up here on my screen, the last thing I want to mention is that writing can be very rewarding, and it takes practice. If you don't have a lot of experience writing, you're probably not going to be very good at it, and it takes time to develop writing skills. There are some people that can kind of just naturally be good at writing. Like, I have encountered that, but for most people, it takes a lot of practice. And at the undergraduate level, students often have widely differing levels of experience with writing. And I'm aware of that, and that it's not something that a lot of us can control, how much writing we did in high school or not. So I understand that. But that writing can be really rewarding, because if you can communicate ideas in a really clear way in the written form, it helps you think more clearly. And I think that'll be made more obvious, that connection, as I start with this first document. So, this first document is just called the writing process. And I'll start with some general advice. I think writing is less daunting when you realize it is just a technology for explaining your thoughts in a clearer and more sophisticated way than you would be able to if you were put on the spot to offer your thoughts verbally. It's just a convenient way to communicate your thoughts. Whenever you are writing something as a student, the assignment's purpose was to get you to think about something. And in the process of communicating your thoughts in writing, you can think about it in a deeper and more organized way. I have broken down the writing process into 4 steps to help make it more manageable. A caveat is that writing can be a very idiosyncratic process. We all have our own practices and rituals and quirks that make the process tailored to each of us. So this is a rough guidelines for different steps that I recommend taking in order to approach writing, college level writing. And the whole purpose, again, isn't, you will be assessed based on the paper that you turn in, but the paper is not the most important thing. The most important thing is the work that went into the paper, the process of learning about a topic and thinking about a topic and organizing what you've learned and what you have thought about a topic. And the paper is just evidence that you did that. And that's what you're graded on ultimately, because I can't grade you, on this process exactly, but it's the process that's the most important. So waiting until the day before a paper is due and just putting a couple hours into it to spit out a paper, you might, if you're a talented writer, and more experienced writer, be able to get a grade that you want on that paper. But ideally, the whole point of the education process and the writing the paper and everything is actually going through the process of learning to think more clearly and communicate more clearly and to be more informed. So with that said, the first step is pre-writing. So this step includes all the thinking, research, and conversing with others you do to generate the thoughts that you will communicate in writing. Brainstorm, read about your topic, talk to others about your topic, do whatever it takes so that you are in a position where you are overflowing with thoughts you want to communicate in writing about your topic. This stage is usually the longest stage. So This stage is also includes figuring out your topic, which I'll talk more about in this video. But that's going to take some time to narrow down the wide subject that is available to you, um, depending on the class. So if it's world religions, the topic of the world's religious and philosophical traditions. That's a very huge, net to be casting. So you have to figure out, okay, what is a particular tradition I want to write about? What is a specific aspect of that tradition, so on and so forth. And that's going to take some time and is time consuming and is part of the pre writing process. Also, in pre writing is doing research. You are going to write about something, and the whole point isn't to be graded on how much you already know before taking the class and writing a paper just based on what you already know, but to learn about something and think differently or more critically about something. So you're going to actually have to do some research and go through the process of learning information about whatever topic interests you. And then once you've absorbed new information, you take time to think about it, think critically about it, try to understand it on a deeper level, develop opinions about it. How are you reacting to it? This is time consuming. However, all of that is something that you probably do already. I'm sure most of us, maybe not all of us, spend a significant time on the internet, even on social media, trying to learn about things that are relevant to our interests and developing ideas and opinions and a worldview in reaction to that. So this is just kind of an extension of that. Only you get a grade and some college credit for doing it. And you get some acknowledgement for doing that. What's kind of annoying is when in real life, outside of the classroom too, when people have opinions and they don't really know anything about the topic. So this is an opportunity to really have some integrity about the process of this is a topic that I'm interested in. Maybe you already have opinions about it, but really have an open mind to maybe develop different opinions about it and to be more informed and think critically about any assumptions or presuppositions you have about your topic. Or maybe pick a topic that you don't know a lot about. And just to develop a greater awareness and knowledge base about that topic, and then develop an opinion based on what you learn. That's kind of the whole point of writing. That's kind of what we're getting at here is this process. Okay, so the next stage is arrangement. So once you have a bunch of notes and ideas about your topic, you need to arrange them. Concretely, this looks like an outline. Any paper you turn in should be organized, which means it should be able to be converted into a coherent outline. To make sure that is the case for your papers, draft the paper using an outline, which you put together at this step. The way you arrange your ideas, particularly in an argument, can increase or decrease the clarity of what you are trying to communicate. Organization impacts content, especially persuasiveness, when you are putting together an argument. So, for example, before I get into that, it's very difficult to go from doing a bunch of research and being flooded with information and thoughts about something to putting together a draft of a paper, a rough draft of a paper. So this step helps you organize and arrange what you've learned and what you're thinking about a topic into a coherent argument in the case for these papers, for this class. So an example of how arrangement is really important in a persuasive paper is that it's worth considering when you're building an argument whether it's better in a particular context and on a particular topic to start off maybe with the most compelling piece of evidence for your claim, or to start off with weaker pieces and then end with the most compelling reason, or, all of those kind of organizational decisions can impact how persuasive your argument is. In an argumentative paper, it can also be really helpful to organize it where you have a claim and you have a supporting reason for that claim. And then in the next section, to address a counter argument, a really obvious counter argument. That is another way of building persuasiveness as well. But the outline stage is really necessary to sort of transition from what should be a flood of ideas to actually composing a draft. So that's the next step, would be once you've done a lot of research and you've thought deeply about your topic and you have something to say, like you really have done some thinking and you have an opinion and you have reasons for that opinion, then you arrange them and organize them, and then you are in a position to compose a draft. So drafting and revising. Now you are in a position to compose a draft, which should be more manageable given you have an outline. The more detailed your outline is, the easier the step will be. However, for some people, a lot of creativity goes into this step. Sometimes the step changes the way you think about your topic and you make significant changes to your ideas at this step. That's okay. So I've written countless papers throughout my academic career, and sometimes this process goes more smoothly than others, and that's okay. Sometimes I do a ton of pre-writing and research, and when I'm putting together my outline or my draft, I start thinking very differently about my topic and realize that in the process of arranging my ideas and in the process of drafting, those steps have sort of helped me think more deeply about my topic, and now I want to change around some of the content that I was originally intending to communicate. And that's okay. And that's part of this whole process. It can be kind of a more sort of organic process. It doesn't have to be step one, step two, step three. Things can switch around and kind of be in flux throughout moving through these steps. And then the fourth step, proofreading and editing. Once you have a rough draft, you still have a significant amount of work to do. Don't just skim for grammar or spelling errors. Using the spell check feature doesn't complete this step. At this step, you should literally read each sentence of your entire paper one at a time and not only make sure it's free from error, but ask yourself if you are communicating the content in that sentence in the most effective way possible using the most precise language you have in your lexicon. Sometimes you will make significant changes to ideas or the organization to your paper at this step. So the whole point, again, is that even when you have like a full draft, there's still a significant amount of work to do. You still need to put in the effort of really capitalizing on the fact that in written form, you have the opportunity to go back to what you originally said and make it as clear and engaging as possible. That's like the whole point of the technology of writing. So really use this step. So for some people that maybe English is their second language, or not their first language, or who struggle with grammar and spelling and those types of issues, it can be helpful to read your paper aloud to catch those kind of errors, or have a peer help you with proofreading and editing. It's okay to have a peer help you with proofreading and editing, but there's a line between when that person is helping you with just proofreading and editing and maybe making suggestions, and the line between that and when they're actually like writing your paper for you. So it's not okay to have other people write your paper for you, but they can help with this step and sort of give you feedback about your paper and help you catch pretty cut and dry errors and grammar and spelling errors and that sort of thing. Some additional thoughts. When you start out with a topic, you probably haven't thought about it enough to know what you want to say about it. That's sort of the whole point of being assigned a paper. Writing a paper forces you to think about something new or think about something common or something that you already know a lot about in a new way. That speaks to how vital the pre-writing stage is. And then in my kooky, like cheesy font, it's the journey. So like you do get graded on the paper, and the paper is evidence of the amount of time and effort and thinking and researching and communicating that you put into writing the paper. All of that is what's important. The paper is the evidence of the real work that matters. And as I mentioned before, in general, your writing will be assessed based on clarity. Does what you're saying make sense? Is it clearly written? Is it understandable? Organization, which we talked about, is really vital in the arrangement stage. Sophistication of ideas. Is what you're communicating like showing that you actually know something about what you're talking about and have thought about it on maybe a level that someone that hasn't done a lot of work learning about the topic, wouldn't be able to do. And persuasiveness, which we also talked about. Okay. So the next handout I want to talk about is on thesis statements. So there are different types of thesis statements. Specifically for this class, I'm talking about persuasive thesis statements. There are such things as informative thesis statements, but for this class, since you're writing an argumentative paper, I'm specifically referring to a persuasive thesis statement. So this handout is information that's relevant to persuasive thesis statements, but I'm just going to say thesis statements. So at the first section of this handout just describes what a thesis statement is. So it declares what you believe and what you intend to prove. It tells the reader how you will interpret the significance of the subject matter under discussion. It is a roadmap for the paper, and that it tells the reader what to expect from the rest of the paper. It is an interpretation of a question or subject and serves as a summary of the argument you will make in the rest of the paper. It is usually a single sentence somewhere in your first paragraph. Usually it's the last sentence of the first paragraph that presents your argument to the reader. It is comprised of both a claim and the main reasons the author will provide to support that claim. The rest of your paper or essay gathers and organizes evidence that will persuade the reader of the logic of your interpretation. So next, I have a thesis checklist. So once you are at the point where you have a thesis statement, please go back to this handout and look at this checklist and make sure that it meets all of these requirements. So my thesis is an idea or an opinion. It is not a fact or a question. So in a persuasive paper, this is a really like basic example. This wouldn't obviously be something that a college student would be writing about, but the claim that there are 50 states in the United States is a fact. It's not an opinion. Nobody would disagree with it. So it's not a really strong thesis statement. It's just a matter of fact. Also, your thesis should make a claim that answers a question. And I'll talk more about that later. So it shouldn't be a question. It answers the question. The next one, my thesis takes on a position which others might challenge or oppose. That's again tied into the idea that it's an opinion. It's sort of looking at a set of facts and coming up with a claim that involves an interpretation or an opinion or value judgments maybe based on that information. My thesis consists of a claim as well as a summary of the support or evidence I will offer to prove the validity of my claim. And I'll talk more about that in this handout when we get to the structure of it. My thesis is specific, strong, and clear. And does my paper support my thesis specifically and without wandering? So it's really important that whatever the page requirements are for this paper that you're going to be writing or papers, if it's a 4 to 6 page paper, that means that you're going to make a thesis statement that's going to have a claim and outline the support for your claim. Then literally every sentence in your entire paper needs to be playing some role where it's serving the purpose of proving your thesis statement. The whole paper needs to define your thesis statement. So you shouldn't be wandering on other topics or on tangents that are maybe just informing your reader about your topic but aren't relevant to your thesis. The entire paper needs to be an argument. And sometimes it might seem like you're wandering away, but then it comes back to whatever you're wondering about actually is part of your argument. That would be different. But if you are including other topics that are loosely related or maybe even strongly related to your topic, but are not immediately or directly relevant to your thesis statement, that doesn't belong in your paper. So here is a really lame example of a thesis statement. It's a very neutral thesis statement. So this obviously isn't the type of topic that you would be writing about. But peanut butter and jelly sandwiches are the best type of sandwich because they are versatile, easy to make, and taste good. Okay, let's look at the structure of this. So the thesis, as I mentioned, has to have a claim is the first part, and then an outline of the support for that claim. And we see that in this example. So the claim in the above example is peanut butter and jelly sandwiches are the best type of sandwich. And then the claim is connected to the supporting reasons for the claim with the word because. Depending on the grammatical structure of your persuasive thesis, you might also connect the claim to the supporting reasons with the words as evidenced by. It depends on the grammatical structure and the type of topic that you're writing about. And as students that understand the English language to some extent, you'll kind of be able to have a feel for which one would work. And this is an example of sort of there are obviously other words and phrases that you could use to link your claim to the supporting reasons. But for the sake of helping you understand how to write a thesis statement, I'm sort of subjectively putting this constraint on you to be helpful. If for some reason, when you get your thesis statement approved by me, you want to use a different connecting phrase, that's fine. We can just acknowledge that. But because a lot of students really struggle with understanding how to write a thesis statement, I try to make it easier by making it a rule that you either use the word because or as evidenced by to connect your claim to the supporting reasons. And then the supporting reasons in this example thesis are they are versatile, easy to make, and taste good. So here is the template for a persuasive thesis. You make a claim, a clear and specific claim, and then use the word as evidenced by or the word because, and then you list one or more supporting reasons for that claim. So depending on how intricate the reasons are, you might only have time or space to include one, you might have five. And it's really helpful to be able to write a thesis once you have finished with the pre-writing stage and are almost finished with the arrangement stage and an outline for your paper. It's not possible to just start with a thesis statement. If you start with a thesis statement and then go look for information to support what your thesis statement is out the gate, that's a biased paper. The whole point is go get the information, try to get your hands on the best information that you can, and then develop an opinion about it. So a little bit about moving from subject to thesis. So the subject is going to be basically whatever the class is that you're taking with me. So if it's world religions, then the subject would be the religious traditions, of the world, whatever. Or if you're taking intro to philosophy with me, it's just anything related to philosophy, like ethics, whatever. If you're taking globalization, then the subject is globalization. And then you move to topic and narrow it down a little bit more, or significantly actually within that. And then do some pre-writing about that topic and understand what are some guiding questions in that topic that are sort of shaping the research that's being done on that topic. And then you answer that question with your thesis statement. So here is an example. If a student was taking the class, and this is actually, I think, a very similar, I did this like from memory, but I think I wrote a paper similar to this in my undergrad, but the subject would be religion in the United States. So a topic, how do you narrow that down? It'd be easy to just pick, Mormonism is a tradition that came out of, that developed in the United States. So I'm interested in Mormonism. I do some research about Mormonism. And then I realized like there's already conversations by experts and scholars about that topic. So familiarize yourself with some basics of what scholars are concerned about with that topic. So, a question that you might encounter while doing your research or learning about Mormonism is the question, how is Mormonism a uniquely American religion? And then, after you do more pre writing and then develop an outline and know what claim you want to make and how you're going to support that claim, then you can summarize all that in a thesis statement. So, here would be an example thesis statement. Mormonism is a uniquely American religion, as evidenced by, there's the transition phrase, the way ideas about manifest destiny are expressed in the Mormon concept of the celestial kingdom, the significance of American sites and land in Mormon scripture and narrative, and the valorization of pioneer life in Mormon culture. So this is a clear and specific thesis statement. It could even be better. Like you could be more specific about what do you mean by uniquely American. That could be better in this example. And then you have your connecting phrase where you connect the claim part with the outline of the reasons. So, and then you have the reasons. And in here, there are 3 clear and specific reasons that the student is going to give for making this claim. And you can see this thesis is a roadmap for the paper. You read this thesis and you know what's the point of the paper, what is it, it's defending this particular claim, and that this is the outline of the evidence that the author is going to pull in order to explain why they have come to the conclusion of this claim. It can be difficult to know. Picking a topic can be really difficult. It takes a lot of work to figure out like what interests you and to have a sense of like what's doable within the sort of the page lengths that are going to be assigned for your papers. So it's important to try to pick a manageable topic. So if you were in one of my philosophy or religion classes, you wouldn't want in a 4 to 6 page undergraduate paper to have a thesis statement that's trying to prove or disprove the existence of God, for example. If you like, that's not something you can do in a 4 to 6 page paper. So you want to make a claim that's manageable within the page lengths. If you're in a globalization class with me, you don't want to make a claim about just globalization being good or bad. Globalization is a huge concept with multiple patterns, economic, political, environmental patterns, that are part of the concept of globalization. So you wouldn't want to, your claim to just be globalization is good or bad. You kind of want a more specific, nuanced claim. And as a general rule, you want your papers to show off a depth of knowledge about something. It's more impressive to show that you have some detail and some depth in your understanding of a part of a topic rather than like a really broad understanding of a topic that like a lot of people could have without doing very much work or research. Some other information would be also to remember that in an academic context, so for example, taking a class through Penn State, you need to kind of assume a neutral reader. So you don't want to necessarily assume that your reader has the same perspective as you. And in my classes pertaining to philosophy and religion, that would mean like not making claims that are like faith-based claims, because you can't assume that a neutral reader in an academic audience has the same faith as you, for example, or has the same religious beliefs as you. So that's something also to keep in mind. Okay, so now I am moving to the third and final handout. We're almost done. So this is the handout on citations. So for your papers, you need to have a works cited or bibliography page, as well as in-text citations. Sort of a side note is that whether it's called works cited or bibliography sort of differs based on which citation style you use. But for longer academic work, so for example, for my master's theses, I had to have a works cited, which would include all the sources that I had actual in-text citations for throughout my paper. So those would be all the works that are actually cited in my paper. And then on top of that, you would have a bibliography page, which is all of the sources that were used as sort of general knowledge in forming your particular master's thesis. I don't know if this is going to be audible in the video, but my dog is near me and snoring. So if you hear snoring, it's my dog, and I apologize for that. And I'm very far into this video and don't want to re-record all of it, so we'll just keep going. Okay, so you may use any citation style as long as it is an established formal citation style. The most common ones are MLA, APA, and Chicago or Turabian style. For most of my academic career, for my undergrad and first master's, I used MLA. And then I got a master's from University of Chicago and used Chicago style there. And now, as I am pursuing a master's degree in social work, I have to use APA, which is the American Psychological Association style. So I'm familiar with all three of these styles. The easiest one is, in my opinion, MLA. And I'll talk about that and discuss some basics with MLA in a minute. But basically, if you know what you are majoring in, it is a good idea to learn what citation style that discipline uses and use that style. So I don't care what style you use as long as it's a legitimate style. So you can't just make up however you feel like communicating where your information is coming from. Something that I would need to address is the difference between quoting and paraphrasing. So when you paraphrase, you still need an in-text citation. An in-text citation isn't just like listing the source at the end of the paper in the works cited or bibliography, but also having a citation in the actual body of the paper so that the reader knows exactly where you're using information from a source and exactly what source you're using. So you need it's called an in-text citation. So when you quote, which is using someone else's exact words verbatim just means using someone else's word for word language, you need to put those borrowed words between quotation marks. When you begin to quote or paraphrase from that source, you need to use what's called a signal phrase to introduce the quoted or paraphrased content. At the end of a sentence where you paraphrase or quote from a source, you need to put an in-text citation. So both paraphrasing and quoting involve in-text citations. So I have some examples. So these examples, I'm using my name, and this isn't real. I'm just using my name and making stuff up. So this is a fictional source, and in these examples, I'm using MLA format because that's the easiest. If you don't know what you're majoring in, and you need to use a citation style for this paper, it's just going to be easier, in my opinion, based on my experience, to use MLA. So here is an example of something you're writing in your paper. and it's a paraphrase. So you say, according to Kim McClimans, students' expectations regarding the workload and time commitment of college level courses differ depending on whether courses are offered in online, hybrid, or in person learning formats. And then this is the in-text citation. So it goes right after the information, the paraphrase. So here I break down what's happening. So the signal phrase in this example is according to Kim McClimans. Since the information comes from, this should say McClimans. So I originally was going to use the example see more butts as the example for this. And then I was like, that's not professional. Some students probably won't think that's funny. Like, I'm not going to do that. I'll just use my name. And then I was looking over this before recording this video, and I thought I had changed it all, but busted. Anyways, so we'll just keep on trucking. So since the information comes from McClimans, but the student is not quoting, and this should say her exact words, the information is not in quotes. However, there is an in-text citation at the end. In MLA style, in-text citations go in parentheses at the end of the sentence, right here, and include the first word of the source's citation in the works cited page, which is usually the author's last name, as well as the page number, if that's applicable, if it's a book or an article that had page numbers. So here you would have, here are the parentheses, and in between them, you have the first word that would appear for this source in the works cited page, which is the author's last name. And then if it was a book or an article that had page numbers, exactly what page you got it from. And then the period goes after the parentheses. Okay, so the quote example. Based on her research, McCliman states, and then this is a quotation mark, and this is the quote that's coming from the source verbatim, word for word. So it goes between quotes. Survey data suggests that student expectations regarding the amount of effort and time a college-level course should require consistently differ depending on whether the course is offered in an in-person, hybrid, or online format. And then you have the citation. So the signal phrase here is based on her research. I can't believe I was so careless about fixing that. McCliman states, and then since the student is directly using verbatim language from McCliman's, this student puts quotes around the quoted material. And then the in-text citation, MLA style, follows after the quote. So you see the quote ends here, after the quote, but before the period is the official style. It is easy to find citation guides and info online. In the past, students have recommended easybib.com. When I recently had to learn to use APA style, I used Purdue OWL. And I think Purdue OWL also has information on MLA and Chicago style. So the information is readily available out there. If you need help, you can always contact me and I can send you links to sites for information and answer questions. As discussed earlier in the class when talking about academic honesty and plagiarism, it takes a while to have a sense for when you're maybe understanding what is plagiarism and what is not. So in general, if something is common knowledge, it's common knowledge or common information about a topic, then it doesn't require citations. However, that's a gray area. There's sometimes some gray areas and some ambiguity whether something can be constituted as like common knowledge or not. When you within a paragraph are using information from the same source and you have multiple quotes or multiple moments where you're paraphrasing, you do not need a signal phrase for every sentence or even necessarily an in-text citation for every sentence. But whenever, basically, it's hard to get a sense of this, but basically, like in a sentence, if it started off with this here, okay, and then I paraphrased a bit from McClymonds, as long as it makes sense to the reader within the paragraph that this is all obviously coming from McClymonds, this information, that's okay. So, like, the general rule is that the reader should know where the info is coming from. So, whenever you switch from one source to another, you need an in-text citation. Whenever you quote, you need an in-text citation. And this can get kind of tricky. So always feel free to reach out to me for more specific guidelines, and I can look at like specific examples within your paper. A few more things left and we're done. So most academic papers have two-part titles. The first part is an attention getter, and the second part explains the topic. So here is an example. I believe this was the title of my master's thesis at UChicago. So, the endearing deformities of the real family. So, this is the first part of the title, and it's like, what the heck is that about? What are you even talking about? And then the second part explains the topic. Here comes Honey Boo Boo. That's what I'm writing. That's the text that I'm writing about. Is here comes Honey Boo Boo and the Carnivalesque. The Carnivalesque refers to a type of like literary psychoanalytic theory. So it explains the topic to the reader. So that's the typical structure of a title. So you should have a title for your papers. A few last things that I want to mention are that you should be using Microsoft Word for your papers, and you need to turn in your paper as a Microsoft Word document, because I use, up here you can see this track changes feature, which allows me to leave like red marks and comments throughout your paper and give you extensive feedback on your papers. So I need you to use Microsoft Word so I can use that feature through Microsoft Word. Your paper should have some sort of heading. So the heading usually would be your name, the date the assignment was due, the class, and then sometimes the instructor. And I'm not really finicky about this. And then you center the title, which might have two parts. And then you get into the body of your paper, and it should be 12 point Times New Roman font, double spaced. Also, you need to have page numbers. You can do that by going to Insert, Page Numbers, and then it gives you the option to put it at the top of the page. A final touch is that you want to double click up here in the header. You can also access the header through View and then Header and Footer. Footer just would refer to writing down here, see footer. And then you want to type your justified right, you would want to type your last name. That's typically the formal way of doing that. And I won't do that now, but that's also a part of turning in an academic paper. I'm just looking over my notes and seeing if there's anything else I wanted to mention. And I think that is it. So also, make sure you reach out to me if you have any questions throughout the process of writing your paper, including the struggle to narrow down a topic and figure out how to move from like a topic to a question to a thesis statement. For the papers assigned in my classes, I do require students to email me their thesis statements in advance for part of their participation grade and participation credit. When you're at that point where you're doing that, you should be pretty far into writing your paper. You should be, almost done with pre-writing and arrangement, because again, the thesis, is something that you compose after you're well on your way in writing your paper, based on the 4-step process that I gave you. When you're asked to email me a thesis statement, it's a tentative thesis statement, so you might make significant changes at that point, but I'm not going to hold you accountable if you email me a thesis statement about one thing and then write about something else for your actual paper, that's fine. That's not going to hurt. Doing that isn't going to hurt your grade. But if you put in a lot of the work before getting your thesis statement approved, that's just going to serve you better and help you have more feedback on the actual paper that you're going to be assessed on. So it's just like in your best interest to do that. And with that, I'm going to stop this recording.